It's the DIY Audio Guy back again for another adventure. Today, we're going to look at some car audio power wire. Let's get started. There's a lot of different wire available out on the marketplace, and I'm going to show you some wire that I have laying around in the garage and talk to you about my own personal experience with wires. And I'm going to show you some wire that I hate and recommend that you stay away from. And I'm going to show you some wire that I love and recommend that you buy. This is a multi-part video on fuse blocks and power wire. And I've got a video where I show you a calculator that you can use to figure out what size power wire that you need. I'm going to give you a link to that video somewhere up on the screen here. And if you want to check out that video, make sure that you do that. And if you like what you see on that video, I'll even share that spreadsheet with you. You just got to let me know instructions on how to do that are in that video. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to compare the size of some different power wires, and not just comparing 0 gauge to 4 gauge to 8 gauge, but to take some different 8 gauge wires and compare them to each other, some different 4 gauge wires and compare them to each other, and so forth and so on. And what I want to do is start off with this picture right here, which is a cross section of some 12 gauge speaker wire that I had out in the garage. And I've got right next to it a 1/4 inch T40 Torx just as a frame of reference, so you can get an idea about the relative size of this wire. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at some close-up pictures of some 8 gauge wire. There's going to be a black ground wire and a red power wire. Now, both the black and the red wire that I'm showing here were from Boss. So to give you a little bit of context, here's a close-up shot of the Boss power wire, the red wire here next to some of that 12 gauge speaker wire that I showed you a few seconds ago. And here is the black ground wire that came in the kit that I bought off of the internet, alongside that same 12 gauge speaker wire that I've stripped back. And you can see that the 8 gauge Boss power wire just doesn't seem to be that much bigger than the 12 gauge speaker wire. I have two other wire samples here to compare with the cheap Boss brand wire. The first one is JSC brand, which I picked up from Parts Express. I grabbed this because I needed to spend a few extra bucks to get free shipping and use a coupon, so I figured why not buy a few feet of wire. You can always use some extra wire. The blue gauge wire is 8 gauge from New Concepts. I like the New Concepts wire quite a bit. Here are all 3 wires side by side, and you can see the differences between the 3 wires. I've got some wire strippers here. The biggest slot on the strippers is labeled for 8 to 10 gauge wire. I set the camera on a high speed setting. Watch what happens. These wire strippers take the insulation off of the Boss wire without cutting any of the strands. Let's try the other wire. Now, I usually use a razor knife when stripping these wires. I'm just using these wire strippers here so I can illustrate the differences between these 3 brands of wire. The JSC wire is a lot thicker. You can see when I strip it that I lose a few strands. Now, the New Concepts wire is advertised as an oversized tinned oxygen-free copper. And you can tell it's a whole lot thicker than the other wires. In fact, it barely fits into my wire strippers. So let's give it a strip. Let's watch as all these shiny little strands of wire fly in every direction. This is a great way to illustrate the difference between the 3 brands of wire. The JSC wire seems to be a true 8 gauge wire, whereas the Boss is undersized and the New Concepts is oversized. So you're going to want to stay away from this Boss power wire kit that you can get on Amazon dirt cheap. I don't have any of the 4 gauge Boss wire, but I do have some JSC and New Concepts in 4 gauge size. Here they are side by side with that 1/4 inch Torx bit again. You can tell that the New Concepts is a little bit thicker. Now, the camera angle exaggerates that difference a tad bit, but both of these are great products and I would recommend either one of them. This is Coco, the 3-legged cat. She wants to be a YouTube star, so she'll show up in my videos and try to help me out. The thickness of the wire is not the only thing you should think about when picking out your wire. Some wire is just easier to work with. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to take a razor knife and strip some of the insulation off of this 4 gauge wire. The JSC wire is easy to cut, but it's very hard to pull the insulation off the wire. I was trying to hold the wire in front of the camera to show you, but I couldn't keep it in focus and pull the insulation off at the same time. The 4-gauge New Concepts wire is very flexible and the insulation is easy to cut. I had no trouble pulling the insulation off of the wire. This gives New Concepts a slight edge in my opinion. Next, I'm going to put up a few pictures of 3 different size wire, all from the same manufacturer. This is 8-gauge, 4-gauge, and 0-gauge. And what's important to remember, as the number gets smaller, the wire gets bigger. And the important thing to remember is that when you jump from 8 to 4 gauge, the cross section of the wire increases by 152%. When you jump from 4 gauge to 0 gauge, the cross section of the wire increases by another 152%. To put that into some realistic terms here, when you go from 8 to 4 gauge, the internal resistance of the wire decreases by 60%, and then going from 4 to 0, you get another 60% decrease in the internal resistance of the wire. And it's important to use a quality wire like the New Concepts I'm showing you here, or that JSC wire that I showed you earlier in the video. And you want to stay away from that cheap Boss power wire because it's just not going to have the cross section that it needs to carry the current that you want for your car stereo. If you'd like to know what size power wire you should use, I've got a power wire calculator. I'll put a link to it in the video description. I'll put a card up here on the screen so that you can go right to that video and you can see the calculator so you can know exactly what size that you need. In addition to the size of the power wire, this video shows that the brand of power wire is also important. And I've shown you here one brand that I do not recommend. That's that Boss power wire. The YouTuber Hi-Fi Vega has a 0-gauge power wire shootout, and right now it is the best power wire comparison on YouTube. I'll give you a link to his video so you can check that out. And this video is over. I hope you liked my video. If you do like it, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And here are some other videos on the screen that you might enjoy as well.